Georgia, Boise State, and Arizona State earned first-round byes, while Clemson made it as the ACC champion. Ohio State, Penn State, and Notre Dame will host first-round games, with Tennessee, Indiana, and SMU securing the final at-large spots. Let's bring in our guy, the mouth of the South. No one to break it down better than him, Paulie Feinbaum. Hey, Paul, hope you had a wonderful weekend. I want to dive right in. Was it a mistake for SMU to get in over Alabama?
Molly, it was a mistake, but, and I say but because I understand where America is. We all saw that feel-good story on Saturday night when this great bunch from SMU, on the verge of getting blown out, came all the way back and missed by a field goal. So the country said they deserve it. Forget deserving. Are they better than Alabama? No, they are not better than Alabama. SMU would probably have 5 or 6 losses if they played in the SEC with Alabama or Georgia's schedule. But in the end, and I'll make this quick, Alabama did it to themselves. If Alabama had not been blown out by Oklahoma 24-3 a couple of weeks ago, I think they would have found their way in. But ultimately, Alabama can blame the committee, but they ought to look in the mirror. It's their fault.
I agree, Paul. It's just hard. You lose to an unranked Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt turned out to be a little better than what we thought they would be, but Oklahoma is unforgiving. It's unforgivable. You lose 24-3 to Oklahoma, who had been dead to right. They had lost, like 3 or 4 games in a row, and they hadn't even come close to winning. And then they blow you out on a national televised game for the entire world to see. And I'm one of the biggest Alabama fans. But and I get it. I get what everybody is saying is that look at the conference that we play in, and the committee is going to have to do something about that, because what you're going to have is that teams is like, hey, once we get past this schedule, let's just play cream puffs. And because I don't want to jeopardize, I don't run the risk of losing to a team and hurting my chances of getting into the college football playoffs. And so Alabama, you're absolutely right, Paul. They did it to themselves. You look at the strength of schedule, you look at all the other stuff, it was in Alabama's favor. But when you lose to 2 unranked teams, yeah, I understand. You beat Georgia, you beat LSU, you beat Ole Miss. You have some very, very impressive wins, but I'm not so sure that the wins that they had was as unimpressive as the losses, because you lost to Oklahoma and you lost to Vanderbilt. No shame in losing to Tennessee. There's no shame in that, because obviously they're in the college football playoffs. You lost to them on the road. But when you lose to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, nah, that's unforgivable for me.
Well, I thought it was the right decision to put SMU in. I have been adamant that it wasn't even about Alabama for me. If they were going to put a 3-loss SEC team in, and SMU got smoked, let's say that, I was adamant that it should have been South Carolina, because I think that they're the better football team. And I know head-to-head mattered, but it was 2 months ago when they played. Here's my whole issue with it. I think, number one, there was no way that the committee was going to watch championship weekend unless a team got absolutely destroyed in those conference championship games and penalize them from getting into a conference championship game. Because what happens is, if you do that, if SMU plays and they have that massive comeback and they lose, and you put Alabama or a Carolina or a Ole Miss in, what you're then going to have is a team next year is going to play in a conference championship game, and the night before, everybody's going to get sick. And they're not going to play in the game. And then they're going to go, well, we were in before and we couldn't play, so you got to keep us in. So they had to do that. Number two, this is why Ward Manuel, respectfully, when he said, well, if you didn't play in conference championship weekend, you weren't going to be able to move or something in regards to, like, against others who did play. That should never have been the case. My point is this, Paul and Shannon. Again, I'll go back to South Carolina. To sit there and say South Carolina not playing in the conference championship weekend and they could not improve means that the win they had the week before against the ACC champion did not change their strength of record or strength of schedule. That is an incorrect thing to say. I do think the great overall takeaway is the conference champions should not have auto buys. They should auto win.
I totally agree with that.
Because, Shannon, what happens is there's 2 levels to this, right? One, we know the SEC is the best conference in college football because they could get the best high school recruits. That's always been the case, right? So, no, the ACC and the Big 12 are not the SEC. But then, is the ACC not better than the Mountain West?
Yeah.
So we're giving because they won their conference championship. Boise State, good football team, they won their conference championship in a conference, not the ACC, but Clemson, who wins theirs, isn't as highly ranked. Well, why can we use the one metric of, well, this conference is better than this conference, but we're not using it in another one? So I think overall, SMU was the right thing to do. I think that they are one of the 12 best football teams. They can beat anybody at any moment because of the way that they played in that second half. But there should be a lot of data collected when it comes to the playoff and how adjustments need to be made.
Paul?
Dan, one second. First of all, they're not one of the 12 best football teams. I mean that's not possible because look, Dan, I can evaluate how they played this year. They have one loss, and their best win is Duke. Alabama's best win is Georgia. I mean, they also beat South Carolina. I mean, Dan,
LSU,
we saw
and Ole Miss.
Inefficiency. Yeah, of course. I mean, by the way, not worth debating. And your point about South Carolina is fair, but you cannot disregard head-to-head. But what Dan said there, I agree with completely, though, is this farce of a system of letting Boise State waltz on in and Arizona State.
That's
I'm not saying they're
much,
not.
Paul. Yeah. I agree.
And the biggest, the most laughable.
You beating Nevada,
go ahead,
you beating UNLV, is that the same as playing Georgia, Alabama, LSU, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Florida? Really? Are we really equating the Mountain West and the Big 12 to the SEC and the Big 10? Is that really what we're doing? Come on, committee. Y'all know it's not even comparable.
I want Paul.
And Molly, one last thing here. What Dan said, which I do. Warren Manuel, I mean, really, he's the chairman of the committee, and I've never seen a guy come in front of cameras like he did last Tuesday night and screw up more. I mean, he essentially said there's not going to be any movement. We're going to protect the conference champions. I mean, the only thing he really, and then he added to that in saying that Miami was out, Shannon and Dan and Molly, that Alabama's resume is significantly better, but then he puts SMU in with a far inferior resume. But again, expecting people like that to make sense on national television, I don't know why we expect that, because we're television and we're supposedly professionals.
That's true.
Hey, Dio and Paul, he could have said nothing. He didn't have to say anything about why he had Alabama over Miami. He could have just let it go. He was the one that said, oh, look at the wins against top 25 teams. Look at who they've beaten. Look at who they've lost to. He said that. So he opened up Pandora's box when it was closed and had a lock on it. No one asked him that. So he gave too much information, and then he backed himself into a corner by putting SMU in over Alabama when clearly Alabama has the most. It wasn't like SMU won the title. You have a legitimate case. If you put them in, okay, and they won, I get that. But they got 2 losses. Are you telling me their 2 losses are impressive? Are you telling me the wins against Duke? They got 11 wins, but they beat Duke. Really? How many wins you think Duke would have in the SEC?
Yeah, but okay.
All right, final word here. Go ahead.
Real quick. Number one, I do think Oregon got a little bit of a shaft as well, because I think their road is difficult. I think the second thing is this. And Paul, maybe you know a little bit better than me. I got a lot of love for the SEC, but we can't. I hear a lot of people from the SEC being like, we're the toughest conference ever in the history of any type of sports, and patting themselves on the back. Probably fair to say in some points, but then being like, well, we're not going to schedule tough out-of-conference games anymore. It's either you're the biggest and baddest conference and all you have to do is play each other, or not. We can't have both of them.
Well, I'm not going to let you know, because I get no reward for scheduling tough out-of-conference opponents. I don't get rewarded for that. So why would I do it? You think I'm going to run the risk and get beat with a tough out-of-school? No, absolutely not. I'm going to play Duke.
Well, think about Clemson for Shannon. Think about Clemson, for example. They're the ACC champions, right? They lost to Georgia 34-3. They lost to South Carolina, which is somewhere between about 4 and 6 in the SEC, depending on who you ask. And they lost on their home field. And I'll go ahead and predict right now, they're going to lose to Texas. So they're at the end of the season, they're going to be 0-3 against the conference, the SEC. So you can talk about the SEC bias and all that nonsense, but there's a prime example that the ACC representative can't beat anybody in the SEC.
All right,
SEC is the best conference. Yes, it's the best college football in the country.
All right, we're leaving it there. We got to go, guys.
I'm not sold on that Texas.